Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Through the Lens of Learning Career Development series. On this episode, we're going to continue the ABCs of career development, and today we're going to talk about the letter I, which stands for interviewing. And what I want to talk about is from the perspective of you have secured an interview and you are preparing to go into that interview and talking about what to do to prepare, what to do while you're in the interview, and then we'll touch slightly on what to do after the interview concludes. So to start with, when you find out that you have an interview, it could be a phone screen with a recruiter at a company, it could be with the hiring manager, it could be an advanced interview with a panel of people, whatever that might look like. What you want to make sure that you are doing is planning and getting that prep done up front and being able to prep and practice. Those are the two P's, the two huge things that you need to make sure that you're thinking about. And in preparing, you want to find out more about the organization as much as you can from what's publicly available or from others that you know at the organization possibly, and find out different things about possibly how it's organized, what their mission and values are, the different roles that are available, how the role that you're applying for would support other people, and if possible, even comparing that to that general role, looking up to see what the roles and responsibilities typically are. You would know that from the job description that those are in there, and that's typically standard language. They might tweak it a little bit based on the role specifically at the organization, but you'll gather some insights from that information. So you want to make sure you know about the company and you know about the role, and you also want to prepare some questions. You are interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you, and you should have questions available to ask at any level of interview, from phone screen with the recruiter, hiring manager, to panel, to the CEO if you end up having to have an interview with that person. Making sure that you have questions, because that shows that you're interested and you want to learn more, and is very genuine. So thinking of what those questions might be, maybe based on the information that you found, or getting insight into a typical day, or what does planning look like, the strategy, what training and development opportunities that you have, the type of leadership, the person, their leadership style. There's so many different questions that you could ask. So you want to make sure that you're preparing what those might be. The other thing is practicing. So before you go into that interview, you definitely want to practice. You can do this. There are systems where you can videotape yourself practicing and sharing that with someone else. That you could also videotape yourself on your phone, send that to people, or be able to watch that later and look up tips and different things like that for interviews. You want to practice maintaining eye contact, and especially if you're in a panel interview, maintaining eye contact with the various people on the panel. Typically, when I'm asked a question, whether it's in person or on a panel, I will look at the person when I start to answer and then make sure that I'm making eye contact for a few seconds with the different people on the Zoom or in the room, and not just answering that one person. So being able to practice that will be huge, because it shows that you're not just talking to that one person, that you are trying to answer that question for everyone involved in the interview. And you also want to make sure that you're practicing what you're going to say, how you're going to respond, and hopefully in your preparation you are doing some things related to the STAR method. And look that up if you do not know what that is, the STAR method for interviewing, so that you can prepare some examples of situations or scenarios that you've been in for typical skills for the type of job that you're applying for. And you'll want to practice telling those stories, so you can kind of get it down pat and not stumble over your words and try to think about what you're going to tell about the story. And it's definitely okay to have notes with you, even if you're in person, on the phone, or on video, to have your own notes and even your questions written out or typed out and prepared. So beforehand, those are the two things. It's preparing and it's practicing. Now, when you go to your interview, if you're doing it online or if you're doing it in person, it's really important to be early. Being early for an interview is being on time, but you also don't want to be way too early. So even if you show up a half hour before the interview time, it may be a matter of waiting around the corner in your car or something like that if you're worried about being able to find the location okay. When you go to sign in, you'll want to make sure that you are signing in at least 5-7 minutes prior to the actual interview. And one of the reasons I say that too is I went to sign into an interview. It was probably about 3 minutes beforehand, and it wasn't enough because I ended up having to download another version of Zoom or WebEx. I can't remember which one it was, and I ended up entering into the meeting exactly on time, which for me felt awkward because I'm so used to trying to get there early, and that just makes me more comfortable, and it just shows that you're ready to go. So that was a little wild, and who knows, it could have taken another minute and that would have looked even a little bit more wild. So make sure 5 to 7 minutes that you are going and logging into the video if it's virtual. And if you're going in person, I would say even walking in the door 7 to 10 minutes early, and you could take a seat in the waiting room or wherever that might be, just making sure that you know you're in the right place for the interview and that you're ready to go. The other thing when you're in the interview, one of the big questions that typically comes up is tell me about yourself. And everybody just cringes when they hear this question because it's like just a loaded open question, and how do I answer this? There are some roles where somebody, a hiring manager or recruiter may say, walk me through your resume. If they ask you, that's what you can do. They want to hear how you're telling your story of your career and your progression over time. It's not because they didn't read your resume. It shouldn't be because they didn't read your resume. It's to hear how you're telling that story of your journey over time. If they don't ask you to walk through your resume and they say, tell me about yourself, you can talk to, what I recommend is catching 3 or 4 skills, primary skills that are important to that role, and how you have been able to experience and build upon those skills, and that makes you a solid fit for that role. So you may have been able to do things in your undergraduate, graduate degrees, certification programs, trainings, anything like that, as well as your work experience, to gather those skills and to be the perfect fit for this type of role. So think about some of those things. It could be a mix between interpersonal skills and technical skills. So feel free to write those. One interview I went into, I actually had a Post-it note with bullet points, and I had like 4 different skills bullet pointed, and then I might have had just like a little word or two about the story I wanted to tell related to how I gained that experience, why I was a good fit. And that was really honed in on me being the right person for that job versus going through a historical timeline of, well, I did this, then I did this, then I did this, and it's like, who cares? So that is a good way to answer that question. Be prepared. You can Google what are standard questions that might be asked. You can also look at like what are common questions for an engineer. What are common questions for an administrative assistant? Like, you can Google these things. You can leverage ChatGPT to give you ideas of some questions, so that you can make sure that you are practicing those beforehand and you're able to answer those and give examples. The other thing you want to make sure that you do is that you're not giving the same exact example for every single thing. Typically, using that STAR method and prepping, thinking about the skills, and then the STAR method for each of those, maybe top 5 to 10 skills, will help you to come up with different stories, different scenarios to share of how you have experienced, how you've grown, how you've gone through and leveraged those skills. So making sure that you're thinking through that, and again, not using that same situation or same story over and over, because it doesn't show a uniqueness about how you've gained your experience, how you've gained your knowledge, how you've grown your skill set. Whereas if you have a variety of different situations and scenarios, even if it's from the same organization, that provides more insight as to how you've been able to apply yourself in different experiences and different moments. So making sure that you are doing that. At the end, or even before the end of the interview, the hiring manager, the panel, or the recruiter will likely ask, do you have any questions for me, or do you have any questions for us? And you say, yes, actually I do. Well, and one of the things that I will tell you is I had a list of questions. Let's say I had like 23 questions. I was really interested in this job role. I'd written down like 23 questions. I actually typed them up, printed them out, and I was really interested in learning about the role, the organization, the leadership, all of those types of things. What I was able to do is during the interview, I actually crossed off as they answered some of those questions, because it naturally happens that they went through and answered some. So I crossed off a few because of that. And then what I did even before I got into the interview was on my questions that I had, 23, even if you cross off, say, 3 of 20 left, that's a lot of questions. And you're likely not going to have as much time to ask questions as they asked you questions. So what I had done beforehand is drawn a line under like the 5th question and said, if anything else, these are the top 4 or 5 questions that I really, really want to know the answers to. So I kind of put them in priority order. So I was able to ask those questions. And then some of them I realized, depending on who I was talking to, whether it was the right audience or not. So the recruiter wasn't able to give me some information that I asked about the audience for the role, whereas the hiring manager was able to give a clearer answer for that. So I was able to make a note and save that for advancing to that next interview and being able to ask that question. So those are some tips and tricks for the questions that you have to ask at the end. And then as they close out the interview, actually your last question should be, unless they already start into it, what are the next steps? What should I expect? Kind of time frame wise, things like that. And then you can, thank them for their time and the opportunity to interview, and sign off from there when they said everything's good to go, or leave the facility if you're interviewing in person. And just a couple notes of post-interview, some courtesy things to do is to make sure that you are sending a thank you. In today's age, sending a digital an email with a thank you to the individual, or there was a case where I did not have the names and emails for all of the people on a panel once. I only had, I think it was 1 or 2. And so I sent it to that hiring manager, and I actually sent it to the recruiter and copied the hiring manager, and I said, I just want to send a thank you. Would you mind sending this to all the people that were on the panel? I would greatly appreciate it. And so that recruiter was able to forward that information along. Yes, it's awesome and amazing if you're able to deliver a physical in the mail, but that is not always possible. And with so many companies going remote or hybrid, it's harder and harder to have a physical address to send something like that to. And the time it's going to take versus an email may end up putting you past when they decide like who goes on to the next round or who gets offered the role. So email is typically your best bet to go. And a simple thank you for their time, kind of reiterating that, as well as if you can pick out one thing or 1 or 2 things and that you believe that you're a great fit for the role, 1 or 2 things that were in the interview that you can share and that you appreciate and things like that are some good tips for the post-interview. And the other thing post-interview is if you are told that you are going to hear within a week that what the next step is, whether you made it to the next round, whether you got an offer, all of those kinds of things, then if a week goes by and you have not heard, well, after that week is over, that next day, after the week, then you reach out to the recruiter. And if you still haven't heard anything after a few days, let's say 3 or 4 days, then you pick up the phone and you call the recruiter. Likely they had their phone number in the emails that you've been working with them on. So you can call and leave a message. Make sure that you are not calling before the time frame that they gave you on what the next step is. So if they said it's going to be 2 weeks because of a holiday or vacations or things like that, and they will get back to you at the end of that 2-week mark, don't be calling every couple days. Don't be calling a week in and say, have you made a decision yet? That's annoying, and it's just not appropriate when they have already given you what that time frame looks like. And it gives an indication of the potential of how you might be if you worked in their environment and you had a certain time frame that you would be getting something, or that you would have something due, and you're coming up and asking all these questions and things like that. So that it may not look all that, it will likely not look all that great on you. So those are just some tips and tricks for post-interview. Be patient. I know that is so freaking hard. Believe me, from my experiences, I know that is challenging. Have patience until you hear something. Continue with your job search strategy, with looking for roles, for applying for roles, for interviewing for roles. I talked with a client not too long ago that he was continuing to do that because it's like, until I have my orientation, I don't believe that I have a job. Even signing a contract, people have had those taken back. Not that happens on a regular basis, but there have been a couple people I've talked to that have had them pulled out, and they ended up not getting the funding for a role after they had already interviewed or they were close to interviewing. So continue on with your job search process and all the aspects of it until you have your start date and you actually start that job. So continue working through. I know it can be tedious and anxiety driven and frustrating. Also make sure that as you're in the process of looking for a role, this is a little extra here, that you're doing something for yourself. You should not be 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, or whatever that looks like, looking for a job. I know you have to pay your bills, and I know that you need work and you need to bring in that income. You also need to maintain your sanity. So make sure that you're carving out time and space for you to do something that brings you joy and brings you happiness. Maybe that's spending time with your children, with your family, with friends, Netflix binging, like reading, whatever, going to the campground. That was it for me. Those types of things. Make sure that you do that and that you're taking care of yourself in the process. That's so important. You can get burnout even looking for a job. So with that, I hope these tips and tricks and strategies for interviewing, the prep and getting into the interview, some of the things there as well as post-interview, are helpful for you. I would love to have you be a part of the Career Development Club. We are a group within LinkedIn, if you search Career Development Club, as well as Facebook, and all the same information is streamed and shared to both locations. So if you're on one or the other or both, please feel free to join us, and I will see you on the next episode.